All righty, you know what time it is. Time for another train wreck. Welcome to Not Another Baptist Podcast, a weekly podcast about what two knucklehead pastors in New Mexico are learning in the trenches of church revitalization. I'm Matt Hensley, the pastor of Mayhill Baptist and managing editor for Lifeway Pastors.
And I'm Kyle Bierman, pastor of First Baptist Church in Alamogordo and director of Replanter Development for the North American Mission Board. We bring a combined 31 years of ministry experience to the table, and we still mess up time and time again.
And you could say that we're experts at what not to do. But before we dive in, allow us a moment to tell you that we are the official podcast of the Word of God. We're grateful for our sponsorship by the Christian Standard Bible, and we love it. And we encourage you to check it out for its blend of readability and accuracy, and encourage you to check it out at csbible.com after the show. I think I got it right that time.
I think you did.
I think I got it right. But as millennials, we knew that at some point this was going to happen.
That's right.
I finally caved in and put on my flannel shirt, my skinny jeans. I even got a latte here in my hand. Why is that? What are we talking about today?
Buttoned, though?
Oh yeah, I got my top button.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good. Got my Converse.
Yes.
Is that a thing?
That's sure. I'm a terrible millennial.
Well, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about millennials. And we are excited today to have with us Grant Skeldon, who has recently written a book on millennials and how to minister to them. And he's going to tell us all about it. So let's start off, Grant, by just telling us a little bit about yourself, your family, and then whether or not you are pro or anti candy corn.
Anti candy corn.
Yes. Good. Thank you.
I'm out. Correct. Have a good time.
Let's start with the most important topic. It's just too consistent would be one reason. But then two, my name's Grant Skeldon. I'm from Dallas, Texas. So I am in Atlanta right now, hanging out with you guys. But then I run a ministry called Initiative Network, which basically trains millennials that are impacting culture. And it also unites them. They're from 50 different churches. And so a huge heart for racial reconciliation and reconciliation even around different church leaders. And the other thing I do while I'm on the podcast and even with the book, what kind of got birthed out of the ministry is training seasoned leaders, older leaders, those who are chronologically superior to us, in how to understand the millennial generation. And so usually pastors that are trying to reach millennials, parents that are trying to raise millennials, and even lately some business leaders that are just trying to figure out how to retain millennials since they're job hopping so much.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Nice. All right. So as the largest living generation, millennials are one of the most studied and yet one of the most misunderstood groups of our day. And it seems like there's been a ton of research that's been done in the last 10, 15 years on millennials, and yet not a whole lot of results on that. And so Grant's, you're trying to change that with your book, The Passion Generation. And so tell us what you mean by when you say they're the most studied and yet misunderstood generation.
Sorry. It's just, I just feel like, I'm in the circles a lot, but I feel like the pulse is pretty. People are so frustrated or sad or desperate or just don't understand millennials. It's so I'm just like, man, there's probably never been a generation, at least the last 100 years, that has been studied as much. But one of my key questions is always, well, who did all the research on the millennials and who's talking on behalf of millennials? Are they actually millennials? I'm shocked that most of the content on millennials is not by millennials. It would be like, you guys are both married, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay. It would be like, if I asked your wives, would you guys be proud of presenting a book to all men across the world saying, we got 50 very, very smart men together to write a book on what women want and what women need? But there's not one woman that's speaking into the studies and the research at all. It's just men. I don't think your wives would be like, yeah, I think that's going to be a real credible resource.
Yeah, that's already on their Christmas list. They're
Yeah, Matt's Guide to Marriage.
yeah,
That's
Matt, it's my guide. It's basically like 1,000 pages of blank. Like this is what I figured out about women.
Yeah,
But you know, and that's one of the reasons that I kind of opened up this thing with the skinny jeans and the latte and all of that kind of stuff. What I like to say often is one of the first things you can do in terms of reaching millennials and is maybe not ostracizing them and putting them down all the time.
Yeah,
that's probably
that
step
would be a good
one.
place to start.
I would believe that's towards the top. I don't know what you think about that, but in line of that, you know, they have a reputation. Again, this is from like the outside looking in of being lazy. Why do you say most generations have that label? Why do you think that is?
I think that I personally think if you look at different studies, it sounds like young singles have always been kind of labeled as lazy. There's articles in Time magazine from talking about Xers, and it says that they're lazy and they want to hike the Himalayas, and it said they want to just watch TV, and it said zap the TV dial. There's studies on. I remember it was Time magazine. There was one in Life magazine on boomers as well. But it seems like the older generation, as technology changes, culture shifts a little bit, that the older generation always kind of views the young singles and those coming out of college as with a different work ethic, different priorities and hobbies. I will say culture has massively shifted a lot in the millennial generation, but I don't personally think like millennials are far lazier. I do think they're probably. I'll give it to people that I do think they could be more selfish in the sense that I am curious to see what will happen with the millennial generation as they've remained single for so much longer. I mean, including myself, I'm 28. I'm not married. I don't have kids. But that's allowed me to go maybe if the average person got married around 20 years old, let's say, that's allowed me to go 8 more years, maybe 10 more years without considering someone else to the degree that you guys consider your wife or your kids, which forces maturity, sanctification. Matt Chandler, a pastor in Dallas, says that marriage is the left lane of sanctification. Mm-hmm. That's about a decade longer for some young people, entire generation of considering self for 10 more years. And so I think with that comes a lot of luxuries that you get when you're single. You get to do whatever you want, whenever you want, kind of to a degree.
Certainly before kids come along. Yeah. Like, all of my free time is gone.
No, seriously. I mean, yeah, married. When my friends get married, I'm like, okay, they're probably going to disappear a little bit. But when they have kids, I'm like, okay, I'm joking. I sometimes think, okay, unfollow them from Instagram because it's no longer their Instagram. I'm just going to see their child every day.
It's Kidstagram. It absolutely is. Yeah.
It changes.
It's better than Catstagram or Dogstagram.
Okay, I'll give you that. That's true.
Or Breakfastagram. I've had a waffle every day for like 2,100 days or so. And so I post a picture every single morning.
No, you don't.
Waffle. So I can't say any. I absolutely do.
Grant, I will vouch that he absolutely does. 100%.
Yeah, every day. I was trying to get in the Guinness Book of World Records, and so that didn't happen. So I've just created my own, like the Budweiser World Records. Like I don't know if it exists, but it's just I've created it myself, and I'm the chief waffle street king of the world.
Oh, there you go.
That's the title. See, that's the millennial creativity right there.
So, don't blame the millennials for that one. They don't deserve that.
Yeah, don't put that. Don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. The passion generation, you say millennials prioritize our passion, our purpose above provision. Why is it important for different generations to seek to understand one another?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I always want to say that it's not a huge shock that this generation is pursuing jobs and majors and just life decisions based off passion more than provision. I feel like people can generally see that 52% of young people, according to like Business Journal, so not Christians, just young people in general, would take a drastic pay cut in order to have a job at work that made a difference. And so they would take a massive pay cut to do that. So it's generally this generation wants to do something that makes a difference more than make money. Or not that they don't care about it at all. It's just it is more important. However, I always like to acknowledge we have the luxury and the privilege to make those kind of decisions because the generation before us, and especially our grandparents' generation, made major sacrifices in provision. Like my grandparents' generation is definitely the generation that took one or two, maybe three jobs for a lifetime and just was faithful to that and set us up with the foundation to not just consider provision, but also our passion and our purpose. But what I think the tension is, uh, I don't know, it's interesting because it seems like our grandparents and our parents made hard decisions to put food on the table, provide basically a quote unquote a better life for their kids. But now after doing that for a while, we see the fruit of that. And one of the parts of the fruit of that is that, yeah, we don't have to just take a job that we don't enjoy and maybe even hate, which I think a lot of millennials saw their parents do. But we can take a job that hopefully do enjoy, and not fully 100% of the time. I don't think there's any job like that, but it is fulfilling as well. And we come home and we're not just trying to escape work at night or escape work on the weekend. It's actually something that gives us life, and we're potentially excited to go to on Monday morning. However, I think the tension is, there's still that mindset of you got to just do whatever it takes and take this kind of job because it pays well. I often ask young people, when was the last? Don't you sometimes feel like your parents wouldn't care what you do as long as it falls somewhere in the line of being a lawyer, a doctor, an architect, something like that? They just want you to. If you said, "I want to do one of those types of jobs," I feel like most parents in America would be very excited about that because they know it makes good money. But if you said, "I wanted to be a nonprofit leader, an artist, a dancer," something that's like, "Oh, I'm not sure if that's going to work out," that kind of can put some fear in them. Even sometimes if God seems to be calling you to do that, there's a tension there.
And even, there's, we're blessed in the churches that we serve and the ministries that we have. But I was going to pursue a music degree so that I could be a college professor, music college professor, and mom was super supportive of that, and
Good.
ultimately came around to my calling to the ministry. But it took a while because it went from one where there's thousands of colleges across this country. You're going to be able to find a good paying job or whatever as far as ministry, knowing kind of what is there. And it's certainly starting out as part-time and so forth. You're never going to be able to support a family. That was usually the conversations we had.
Right.
And then, my dad, he retires from a job and ended up getting like the greatest job of all time. Is he was the courtesy car driver for a dealership, and it was awesome. He got there in the morning, made coffee, and then would take a few people home. He was an extremely overpaid Uber driver, and
Wow.
people would give him tips, and he loves just visiting with people. And so I mentioned to him, I'm looking for work or whatever. Said, Dad, can I get a job there? He said, when you work a job that you hate for 30 years, then come and talk to me. And so when you said that about the fact that that older generation was working one or two or three jobs, you described my dad in a nutshell. He worked his hindquarters off from morning till night to provide for us, and that was in kind of the single income
Yeah.
era for them for many of those years, and he didn't really enjoy work, and so he came home, and it was pretty much we're going to completely unplug from
Yeah.
all of that, and
Yeah.
so that's a good call. I thought that was enlightening. Kyle?
Yeah, and if you're familiar with the book Halftime by Bob Buford, it almost sold nearly 1 million copies, and it really hit home with Christian business leaders and Christians in the marketplace. And the whole concept, even the subtitle is moving from success to significance. And this book was kind of like halftime of you had like a midlife crisis, then a whole generation really connected. Again, Christians in America predominantly, that they kind of came. The premise is you come to the end of your life and you've worked this job for a long time and you've had a lot of success and you're way better off than when you started, and you provided your family with some great foundation. However, you're just kind of like, man, is this it? Like, is this what I worked so hard for? Was it really worth it? If I could go back, would I do something different? And his question is, how do you move from all the success you have to significance? And when I read that, I was like, man, I think the millennials, by and large, got to see their parents have that epiphany in their 40s, 50s, or 60s. and are now like, I don't want to figure that out decades later. I want to move from success to significance now. And I definitely don't want to go and work a job that I never am happy about and do that for years. Like, we got to see our parents. And so if it was a midlife crisis, I would say, yeah, a lot of millennials are having more of a quarter life crisis, or as my friend Paul Stone calls it, a quarter life calling, is what we're trying to engage and help millennials figure out. Because the irony is, they definitely know they want significance. I will say millennials struggle so much with figuring out what is that exactly. And I think that comes from the lack of discipleship and investment from the older generation, and on young people's end, the lack of intentionality to be around older people, not just young people.
Yeah. Well, in your book, you talk about discipleship a lot.
Yeah.
So what is your hope for church leaders to take away from reading The Passion Generation?
To make discipleship a normal thing to expect from Christians.
Okay.
Awesome. Hey, short and to the point. I like it a lot.
Love it.
And one of my favorite, we were given a couple of questions to consider asking you. And when I was reading it, I was just reminded of a conversation that I had this morning with my daughters. I take them out to eat on Monday. They don't have school. And so we have a weekly daddy-daughter date with all of them. And so we go out. And they were talking about their plans. Today we were talking about what they want to do when they grow up. And we still have one that wants to be a mermaid, and she is dead set on being a mermaid. That's how she's going to make a difference in the world, I guess. And the rest are like veterans and dentists and all of that kind of stuff. Veterans, veterinarians,
Okay.
and dentists and so forth. And so we've got, a wide range there. And so we're talking about it. I said, well, I'm okay with whatever you guys want to do, as long as you're going to try hard, do your thing, and that you move out the day that you come home from high school graduation. All of your stuff is going to be packed and ready to go. And so I was saying that as a joke, but then I read the deal here that in your book, you share the story about your dad refusing to let you move back home after you dropped out of college. And so the idea there is like tough love,
So there is precedent for what you want to do.
Precedent. I'm going to say, hey, I've got this buddy, his name's Grant. If you got a problem with this idea, you need to just go talk to him. Take it up with him and his dad. So tell us, what's your advice on parents when it comes to tough love?
Yeah, so it's kind of two angles that I talk to parents and saying, sometimes I feel like you guys are so focused on us making money that you guys, and you're trying to like make sure we take these jobs that like make good money. And this is my own intention, is I felt called to start a nonprofit. And my dad, being an accountant, and he's not really a strong believer, if a believer at all, honestly, wasn't a big fan of me doing that. And it makes sense logically. From wanting to do more marketplace stuff to now wanting to do nonprofit when I became a Christian. He was really hoping it was a fad or a phase I was going to go through. But once I decided to drop out, he really wasn't a big fan of that either. And so basically, my dad's also from South Africa, so he's very culturally different than most American fathers. And basically, I'm sitting home with my mom about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock when my dad comes home. He sees me home. He's like, hey, what are you doing here? And I'm just like, hey, I'm just going to stay here for a little while till I find a job. And he's like, no, you're not. And he takes my stuff and he just puts it in the front yard. And he's not shouting at me, but eventually I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? Like, why are you taking my stuff? And he just wouldn't talk. He just kept walking, put my stuff out. And I'm like, Dad, seriously, like, talk to me. And he just finally, after everything's in that front yard, he just said, you can't drop out of college and just think you're going to live here. Like, you have to go find a place to stay and you have to go find a job. Like, which at the time I was so frustrated. I was like, so many of my friends live with their parents, so many of them. How is this such a big deal? I'm not saying forever. I don't even want to be here for a long time, but I need a place to stay. And he made me, I don't know. He didn't follow up the next day and figure out what I was going to do, but it was tough love. And at the time I was frustrated with it. But now today I think of it as a season that, one, forced me to really live with the consequences of my decisions. Two, it made me really decide very, very wisely and quickly what kind of job I was going to get. And at that point, I didn't get the luxury of choosing a job that I was passionate about. I had to choose a job that would provide a roof over my head and pay the bills. Yeah. And three, maybe most importantly, is it forced me to rely on the Lord as my father, and rely on the Lord just to establish the next steps in my life. And I remember memorizing Proverbs 3 about how God does do that. And I don't know his ways, and he's going to, like, just that he's not going to abandon me. He's there for me. And even like a father who reproves me, just like my father had just done it, he reproves me because he loves me. And those verses, I thought to myself, I almost memorized the whole chapter. And I thought, later on in life, I thought, man, I wonder if I would have memorized scripture and taken a job. I started working at Pappadeaux's, a seafood restaurant down in Dallas, and a couple, I'm sure, other places. But I took a job I probably never would have taken, and I relied on the Lord. And basically that season was one of the closest seasons I ever had with God, even though it was a very difficult season. And that just seems to be, if you think about your own life, the seasons where you're like, man, I was in the Word regularly. I was journaling. I was seeing God regularly. They tend to not be the greatest seasons, technically. They tend to be harder ones. And so there's the parents that are, I think, also this mentality of participation trophies, which usually we get made fun of for, but I'm like shocked by that. It's another way where I'm like, you realize like Xers came up with that concept. We were like 5 years old on a soccer field. Like, we didn't come up with a committee saying we demand it. We just received it and didn't complain. But that participation trophy is, I think, a posture of parenting that I appreciate. I think it sounds like boomers were hard on their kids. It was kind of like, you're going to walk through the snow and I don't care, and this is what I had to do. And so I feel like Xers were like, I'm a lot sweeter. They swung the pendulum a lot sweeter, but maybe too sweet, honestly, like too kind. They really save us a lot of times from our problems. And so going back to meeting Jesus in the valley of the shadow of death, in the darker places, in the difficult times, and the places where you don't know what the next step is, if we tend to meet God in the shadow of the valley of death, we'll fear no evil, for he is with us. Then in a way, you're kind of saving your kid from the Savior if you save them from the shadow of the valley of death. Like, if you save them from those difficult times. And so I joke, I wonder how many millennials actually read it this way, where they're like, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for mom is with me. Her purse and her second chances, they comfort me. And so we don't really need God if our parents are always going to step in. And so I think that's why, again, we have a generation that millions of young people that live with their parents, and they don't have to make a quick decision. I see this all the time, where the parents come to me as like, how do I get my kid to get this job, to go find a job? He'll never stay at one for a long time, or this and that. I'm like, I'm not sure the context exactly, but you may need to like have them see that if you don't do this by this time, these are the consequences. Or they're just not, they're going to wait until like that perfect job comes, and it almost never comes on the front end. It comes after a couple of years of working.
And as we prepare to wrap up, tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you, either social media or find your book and all of that good stuff. We're going to put everything in the show notes too, but why don't you drop it down for them here?
Yeah, definitely. And so my website is just my name, GrantSkeldon.com. And there's Skeldon. That's also anything on social media. Apparently, I'm the only Grant Skeldon in the world. Thank God. My South African dad.
Yeah.
And so, in Twitter and Instagram, it's at Grant Skeldon. And then the book is called The Passion Generation, and then the subtitle is The Seemingly Reckless, Definitely Disruptive, but Far from Hopeless Millennials.
Wonderful. Well, it is time to hop off the train. Until next time, Grant, thank you so much for popping in with us. We are grateful that you took the time to listen in today. And if you haven't, be sure to subscribe on iTunes. And if you liked what you heard, please give us a 5-star review. And if you didn't, just keep on moving along. You can also visit us online at www.notanother.baptistpodcast.com or on Twitter at NAB_podcast, or you can search for us on Facebook under our name. Kyle, send us out. Let's see if you can do it right.
Until next time, may your coffee be as black as night and as bold as the gospel you declare.
Have a wonderful day. Have a great day, Grant. We appreciate you very much.
Thanks, guys. See y'all.